Iron Maiden, Opeth, Rush. It's Christmas time. Yeah, that's a Christmas tree. What do those three bands have in common? I think it's pretty simple. There are three bands, ladies and gentlemen, that will not be on this list. No, absolutely not. Not only is this because the only one of the three of those bands, Rush, that released an album here in 2012 is actually good, but, well, because the other two didn't release albums this year. Yeah, it's that simple. We're not here to talk about the cream of the crop, we're talking about the shit that is not. That's right. Instead of doing this the weird way, the way that we've been doing it, where we've talked about the greatest and we've talked about the worst, we're going to do things a little bit in reverse. We're going to start with the shit, and then we're going to end the year right with the stuff that really deserves to shine. So it's time for us to do a little bit of a retrospective of the year that was 2012 while we're talking about some of the worst albums of this year. I know that last year I did specifically 5. This year I think I'm going to have a couple of more, but mainly because the music business itself has changed. So what are the biggest storylines of this year? Of course, one of the biggest one was the death of Whitney Houston. Of course, I know all of you out there collectively saying whoop-de-fucking shit. Yeah, I understand. I'm kind of with you on that, mainly because this was one of those things that was once again a dictated hype over somebody's demise. It really seems kind of strange that that's what it takes in order for people to actually go out there and remember their music by buying it. Shouldn't that be something that you should be celebrating whenever you hear it on the radio as opposed to whenever you hear on the television set that they're dead? Yeah, well, that's what actually happened. Now, in the rock and roll world, the independent music scene continued to flourish with bands such as Mumford & Sons. The Lumineers really started to take off. Fun and Gautier both have fantastic selling records. In the metal industry, well, the metal industry actually had a much better year here in 2012 than they did in 2011 as far as shit albums are concerned. 2011, it was the big names that really caused us all the suffering in the world. Instead, here in 2012, it was the scenes. It was the fact that deathcore just is still existent. It's the fact that metalcore has continued to kind of pile on some praise, but also encourage a lot of crap. And for some strange reason, people still give a damn about Screamo. So let's talk about a couple of albums specifically. A War You Cannot Win, By All That Remains. There is absolutely no way that this album was going to escape this list because it's just pretty mediocre. For a band such as All That Remains that has been able to pump out some fairly decent albums in their career, this wretched trend that they've had going on for about the past 2 or 3 is certainly something that, well, nobody saw coming. And if you did see it coming, it was simply because you saw all the hype and exposure of Guitar Hero, meaning that they were eventually going to sell their souls. And while it doesn't exactly feel the same way as maybe Overcome or the other one, this is definitely an album where it's just more of the same boring dribble that you've come to expect from a band like this. It's pretty droll, it's pretty meaningless, it's one of those albums where it just feels like they decided to go into the studio and release an album because they have the money and the capability. So that's not necessarily the best of reasons as to why one should do this. The new Nile album. Yeah, we're going to talk about the new Nile album again. Now, while this album, if it wasn't bogged down by production that was pretty terrible and just mixing levels that seemed really, really off-kilter and just strange, this album actually has potential for being, well, halfway decent. So the fact that it's on this list, this is more on the technical side as opposed to the musical side. However, it is something that needs to be mentioned. Nile is traditionally a band that garners a lot of praise. Not to mention, it's a band that puts out albums that are consistently remembered throughout the course of a year. The difference with this album right here, it really feels as though after its release and after the subsequent shitstorm that was brewed due to some of the qualities of the record that I'd mentioned previously, it just seems like this is an album that was largely and completely forgotten about, which for the band is basically just like laying a goose egg. Considering they have such a rich roots and a rich sense of history within their own history, this is definitely the album that seems like the off album, especially after they're coming off of a release where the opening song, Kaffir, could have easily been one of the best songs of the year in which it came out. So Nile definitely seems to have laid a goose egg on this year, and hopefully this means that these same experiments that they used this year will either not be repeated or will be repeated with a little bit more of a tact to them. And then we get to Adrenaline Mob. We get to one of the two new Mike Portnoy projects. I'm not going to talk about Flying Colors in this video because the Flying Colors album was actually, well, pretty damn tremendous. The Adrenaline Mob album, on the other hand, had its sparse moments, and to be perfectly honest, one of the best moments on that album was not even one of their songs. It was a cover. Aside from that, this album was full of bland, almost hardy, progressive rock. It was more of a hard rock album that seems like it was trying to borderline on Disturbed or even Nickelback or something along those lines. It just really was an album that felt like it went conceptually and otherwise absolutely nowhere. So because of that, it's definitely on this list. At least Mikey was 1 for 2 this year, considering that Flying Colors release was indeed spectacular. And now we're going to get to the ones that are actually going to be expected. So I'm going to get them out of the way very, very quickly. Attack, Attack, Abandon All Ships, Blood on the Dance Floor. Do I need to say anything about these bands? I mean, really, do I? That I've not already said? I've done fucking band review videos on these guys, especially Blood on the Dance Floor. That one was a trip. If you guys haven't checked that out, what are you doing with your lives? These are groups that are basically cashing in on this new culture that is really kind of directed toward the youth. And by the youth, I mean people usually around the ages of between 10 and 17. Yeah, if these are the bands of the future, then the future is not a place that I want to live. I want to find a DeLorean and go back to the 80s. And in a real traditional back to the past instead of back to the future type idea. Yeah, I really, really don't want this to be where music is going to go because it's absolutely obnoxious, it's far too simplistic, and it really banks off of having zero talent whatsoever. Not to mention the personalities on Blood on the Dance Floor are the types of people that you wouldn't even wipe your ass with if they happen to be toilet paper. Instead, you wish that you could just curb stomp these guys into an atrocious piled mess of their own blood. And believe me, with the ways in which they're going a tweet on Twitter, they'd probably invite it. Until, of course, it happens. Then they'd cry foul. But, hey, what are you going to do there? So let's finally get to the ones that are probably going to catch me a little bit of flack. The ones that perhaps some people may not necessarily like or agree with. But, hey, that's what this list is all about. This list is my worst albums of the year. The ones that I feel. Not necessarily the feelings of a collective nation. Let's start with the obvious one. Emmure's Slave to the Game. This could be the #1 worst album of the decade, if you really wanted to go that far. This has taken boring to a new level, it's taken brocore to a new level, and by me saying a new level, traditionally that means I'm saying something that's praising, and that is not the case at all whenever it comes to Emmure and Slave to the Game. This is the type of album, no, I take that back, this is the type of band that makes Fred Durst still appealing in society today to the fact and to the point that I look forward more to Limp Bizkit on Young Money Records doing little songs with Nicki Minaj and Lil Wayne and Drake and insert rapper here than I'm looking forward to the next Emmure album. I would rather hear Fred Durst lay the F-bomb 74,106 times in the same song about the same person without music in the background than listen to another Emmure record. It will be incredible. It would be a miracle. It would be absolutely incomprehensible if I were to happen to decide to endure another Emmure album. And I will say this, and this is above all things honesty. I will only touch Emmure again if you guys demand it. Then we make it to Koloss. Koloss by Meshuggah. Yeah, it's on this list! Come at me! Sorry, Emmure moment. Koloss was meant to be the great comeback of Meshuggah. It was supposed to be basically gent metal's finest hour, considering the band that invented the genre without even trying to ingent the genre. Wow, that was funny. Basically was coming back with what was meant to be their biggest album of the year. And then you listen to it, and it's a total stink bomb. This is an album that just really goes conceptually nowhere. They're able to do some of the Meshuggah staples, but whenever you expect craziness, whenever you expect a little bit more than just repetition, you get repetition. You get simplicity. You get a certain degree of just blasé, semi-expected nonsense. It's almost difficult to concoct the words. This is an album that whenever I listen to it, back whenever it was initially released, and even whenever I listened to it just this past week, granted me the same feelings of disappointment. I just felt as though this was a band that I expected a whole hell of a lot more from, mainly because I did. I've heard these guys at their greatest moments. I have heard the likes of Obscene and Destroy Race Improve and other albums throughout their discography where they have constantly wowed me, even in the moments where perhaps they haven't exactly been at their best. But this was just an album that, for all of the hype and for all of the significance that it seemed to have, felt incredibly flat. And then finally we get to Periphery. Periphery 2. This is the album that I probably recorded one of my longest album reviews. It was over 15 minutes long. Your response was fantastic, and it was because I was expecting that Periphery was going to have the opportunity to really break out and become a big band based on this album. And it kind of happened, but not really to the magnitude that perhaps I had predicted. The predicament of this album is that it is really, really good only in choice moments. It's something where it has all of the capabilities to really showcase a lot. However, it does seem to wear on a bit, and the ideas do tend to become very, very tired, and it's something that does wear on you as the experience wanes on. Now, as I mentioned in the video, it's almost like a tale of two parts of the album, whereas one side is stronger than the other. But also, it's one of those things that, as a whole, you can't necessarily have a terrific album by having a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde beast that's of that nature, where one side of it definitely seems to be out of this world, and the other side just seems to be either okay or just kind of not that good. As a result, it is kind of a clusterfuck of an album. It's one of these albums that does have a stripe of consistency to it, but at the same time really just feels like it is everywhere. So unfortunately, this band, this album, it does land on this list. Now I could go on and on about other people. I could go on about the new Justin Bieber record, Carly Rae Jepsen, Cher Lloyd, all the different people who I've dissected and destroyed in the multitude of track reviews that I've done throughout the year. And no, I haven't had Lady Gaga to pick on this year, but Kesha just released a new album, and hell, I could do that. Nah, I took care of that on Facebook. Mick Jagger basically said to the bitch, "Don't use my name again, you cum-guzzling freak." That didn't really happen, but in my mind it did. Nicki Minaj just released a Katy Perry-like album with 7 additional tracks to Roman's Revenge. Like everybody gives a shit about that, and people might wonder what I think about the new Wiz album. Way too long. Not bad. Beats are alright, but way too long. Pittsburgh is represented by a lot of weed. So there you have it. Some of the worst albums of the year. Oh, I know you guys probably are going to want some sort of list of these, or, what is number 1? What is the worst album of the year? Did you listen to the video? Slave to the Game. Emmure. 100%. There is absolutely nothing that was going to blend my reality to the point where that wasn't going to be the case. Is it because I'm just biased? Fuck no. Whenever I listen to Slave to the Game from Emmure, I listen to a little bit more of their discography as well, because I was really coming in fresh. Was I just believing the hype of other people? Fuck no. I witnessed it for myself, and my ears hate me for it. They want me to go see a shrink. I'm not going to do it, but if you guys make me listen to another Emmure album, well, I might be asking for donations. Yeah, that bad. Don't waste your time with these albums. And have a Merry Christmas.